It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. A long wait for justice almost over. Victims of the infected blood scandal prepare for the final report to be published.
I want people to recognise my son, and I want to be able to go to a cemetery and say, "We've done it, darling."
The Israeli military say the body of another hostage, Ron Binyamin, has been found in Gaza. Meanwhile, the father of Israeli hostage Shani Luke speaks to Sky News after his daughter's body is also recovered from Gaza. Southwest Water lifts its notice to boil drinking water for the majority of people in Devon, but restrictions do remain for 2,500 households. The countdown is almost over for Fury versus Usyk in a heavyweight contest not seen for 25 years. And a second chance to see that spectacle in the sky. The Northern Lights are coming back for a sequel. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30. Good evening. Thousands of lives were lost over the course of 6 decades because of the systemic, collective, and individual failings of the infected blood scandal. On Monday, victims and bereaved families finally hope to see some accountability with the publication of the Infected Blood Inquiry's final report. Victims aren't only campaigning for compensation, they want an apology and to hear the truth about what happened to them and their families. Our health correspondent Ashish Joshi has been speaking to 2 parents whose lives were changed forever.
That, believe it or not, is the sheet he died on.
Colin Smith was just 7 years old when he died, his tiny body ravaged by hepatitis C and AIDS. Colin was born with haemophilia. The treatment for his blood clotting disorder included a product called Factor VIII. What his parents didn't know was that the Factor VIII was made in America, using blood farmed from prisoners, drug addicts, and sex workers.
I think it was about 89 that we realised, because the weight loss was incredible. And we had him home for a little while, and you couldn't just pick him up. We had to use a sheepskin because it hurt him. You know, he said, "Mummy, you're hurting," because he was 13 pounds when he died. That's nothing, is it?
For a 7-year-old.
For a 7-year-old.
Colin was treated by Professor Arthur Bloom, who died in 1992. But in the 1980s, he was one of the country's leading haemophiliac specialists. But documents shown at the Infected Blood Inquiry proved Bloom's research carried great risks, and these were never explained to Colin's parents. This record of the first time Colin went into hospital shows that he has never been treated for his haemophilia at this point. Previously untreated patients were useful for research as their responses to new treatments could be tracked. Patients like Colin. This is a letter from Professor Bloom to a colleague after another visit by Colin to hospital, saying he's been given Factor VIII and acknowledging that even though this was the British version, there was still a risk of hepatitis, but that this is just something haemophiliacs have to accept.
I think Colin was just unlucky enough to be born at the right time. Newly diagnosed haemophiliac, never been treated, which is what they were after, because the documentation states that they're cheaper than chimpanzees. You can only treat a chimp once. You can follow these children throughout their lives, and that's what was going on.
As Colin's condition deteriorated, his parents decided to bring him home for what would be his last Christmas with the family.
My hand was on his chest. And you know, for a mother to actually feel the rise and fall of his chest, waiting for it to stop, because that's what I was doing. I was waiting for it to stop. And then it stopped. And I just said to you, didn't I think he's gone. And I can remember shaking him a little bit, but he'd gone.
I want justice to be served properly, not, hypothetically, let's see the people who did this, hopefully criminal charges. If not, no, as far as I'm concerned, it's manslaughter at least.
I want people to recognise my son, and I want to be able to go to a cemetery and say, we've done it, darling, you've done it. I want my son to have his name back. His name was Colin John Smith, and that's what I want people to remember.
Ashish Joshi, Sky News.
And a reminder that the long-awaited report from the infected blood inquiry is due to be published on Monday. We will have full coverage throughout the day here on Sky News, starting in breakfast from 6 a.m. And then Sarah Jane Mee will be presenting live from the inquiry from 10 a.m. The Israeli War Cabinet Minister Benny Gantz has warned that his National Unity Party will quit the country's emergency coalition government if Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't commit to an agreed vision for Gaza after the war with Hamas. Mr. Gantz threatened to quit unless the government adopts the new war plan by June the 8th and insisted the return of all Israeli hostages was a priority. Today, the Israeli military said the body of another hostage, Ron Binyamin, was found in Gaza, and the father of another victim of the Hamas attack of October 7th, Shani Luke, whose body was recovered this week, has spoken of his relief to our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle.
Shani Luke spent the night before her death the way her family remember her, dancing. Aged 22, she was killed at the Nova Music Festival on October the 7th, when Hamas terrorists broke through the border. On Friday morning, the Israeli military gave Nissam Luke the news he'd long been praying for. His daughter's body had been found in Gaza and brought back into Israel. How do you feel knowing that your daughter has come home?
I feel relieved, and I feel lucky that after from 135 people that are still in the tunnels, that people that were hijacked from their homes, three out of 135 people, one of them is Shani, and she came back home. And it's my wife's birthday, and I think, she felt, enough, I don't want to be in Gaza anymore, the spirit. I don't want to be in Gaza anymore. I want to come back and stay and lie next to my parents.
Shani's body was found by Israeli forces in Rafah on Thursday. She was discovered along with three others, Amit Buskila, Itzhak Galarenta, and Ron Binyamin, whose recovery was only revealed on Saturday night.
Shani loved peace. She was a friend with everyone. She never harmed anyone. She loved nature. She loved dancing. She loved happiness. She had this free spirit.
Tonight in Tel Aviv, thousands took to the streets for the weekly protests against the Israeli government. Negotiations for a new ceasefire and hostage release deal had broken down, and many here blame Netanyahu. At the same time, a senior member of the War Cabinet, Benny Gantz, issued an ultimatum to Israel's Prime Minister. Come up with a proper plan for Gaza by June the 8th, or his party will quit the government.
I think that getting back the hostages is the highest priority within the goals of the war. I'm not saying that the other goals are not important. I just understand that we are facing a very long campaign, whether it's in Gaza, whether it's in other places, but the hostages, they don't have that much time.
Shani Luke will be buried tomorrow in the forest and hills behind the family house she grew up in. Back home, 226 days after she was murdered and taken hostage. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News, in Shrigim, Leon, Israel.
Well, back here, thousands of Palestinian supporters and anti-war protesters have marched through London, calling for an end to the conflict in the Middle East. Today's march saw one of the largest turnouts of protesters on a day which also marks the 76th anniversary of the Nakba, which refers to the mass displacement of Palestinians in 1948. Counter-protesters also held demonstrations in central London, calling for the release of hostages. And this comes as campaigners say that these protests are intimidating to Jewish people. The campaign against anti-Semitism described the protests as taking over swathes of central London at weekends. The Home Office said the right to protest is a cornerstone of our democracy, but there are clear concerns about the impact protests are having on some of our communities, which we are looking at. Well, Sky's chief political correspondent, John Craig, is outside the Home Office for us. John, tell us a little bit more about this Home Office statement. What are these concerns the Home Office is talking about specifically?
Well, on the day of the latest demonstrations in London, the Home Office has revealed that it is looking at calls which come from an organisation, the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, for tougher police powers to cope with what Suella Braverman, when she was Home Secretary here, used to call hate marches, although that's not a phrase you'll hear used by the current Home Secretary, James Cleverly. In a three-paragraph statement to Sky News, the Home Office talks about the right to protest being a cornerstone of the UK's democracy, but it says there are clear concerns about the cumulative impact protests are having on some of our communities, which we are looking at. Now, that three-paragraph statement doesn't mention the Jewish community by name, but it does say all communities should be able to go about their daily lives without fear. And the government goes on to talk about calling on the police to use all the powers available. Now, the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, whose chief executive is Gideon Falter, who publicly clashed with a police officer at a demonstration a few weeks ago, they met Mr. Cleverly here and put forward a number of proposals for toughening up the law. That's what he and the Home Office officials are now looking at. The Home Office says we will be looking closely at their proposals alongside Lord Walney's recommendations, which will be published this week. That's on Tuesday. Now, Lord Walney is a former Labour MP, John Woodcock, who is now the government's advisor on political violence, disruption, that type of thing. And they're looking at his suggestions as well. What the Campaign for Anti-Semitism is calling for is to tackle this, what they call the cumulative effect of these demonstrations. They should be looked at as one big protest, not isolated incidents, the organisation says. So they want tougher definitions of what constitutes disruption and so on. Stronger powers for the police, stronger powers for the Mayor of London to give orders to the police on these sorts of demonstrations. Now, there's no saying that everything that the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism and others are asking for will be agreed to by Mr. Cleverly and his team, but there's no doubt that there is concern here at the Home Office and among senior politicians about the cumulative effect of these protests, and the Home Office now says it's going to look at those ideas plus the very important proposals that we are expecting from Lord Walney to be published on Tuesday.
John Craig with the latest there from outside the Home Office. John, for the moment, thank you. And John mentioned Lord Walney there, the government's independent advisor on political violence and disruption. Well, Lord Walney will be among the guests tomorrow on Sunday morning with Trevor Phillips. You can watch that from 8:30 right here on Sky News. Local officials in the Ukrainian city of Kharkiv say the number of people killed in a Russian airstrike has risen to 4. Another 31 people were injured in the attack on the city in the northeast of Ukraine, the latest in a wave of strikes as Russian forces launch a renewed push. Our security and defense editor Deborah Haynes sent us this report.
We can't see the jet, but it's most likely Ukrainian on the attack. Heading towards the front line, it's not long before there are more signs of battle. This road leads to the town of Vovchansk, a key target in a new Russian assault. Civilians flee in the other direction. We want to reach a Ukrainian military point, but are suddenly told to stop. A voice over the radio says, "Don't come here. Don't come at all."
We're trying to get to an artillery position just outside Vovchansk, but we've just been told to pull over because they've started firing. They've told us that we might not be able to go forward because it's too dangerous at the moment.
We turn back to a makeshift base on safer ground. A member of this brigade said they were moved into their positions a few days before the Russian offensive into the Kharkiv region began.
Ahead of the assault, we were already hitting targets on Russian territory because we knew they were gathering there.
He then describes the Russian attack, launched in the early hours of the 10th of May.
For the first few days, they were storming our positions, columns of 30 to 50 soldiers. We were hitting them.
Sasha admits he was worried about whether the Ukrainian line would hold, but claims the situation is now more stable. Ukraine is belatedly hardening its defences, but the last few days show they've already been badly breached. We visit a second artillery position on the new front line that spans some 40 miles. This place is close to the Russian border, which is where the gun is pointed. It also points to a major problem that magnifies the already monumental challenge posed by Russia's advance.
We are saving our artillery shells right now. We fire one, they fire back 5. Our guys are dying because the West is not supplying us with enough weapons.
A second soldier agrees.
As far as I know, the enemy has a lot more than we do.
If you had more ammunition, what difference would it make?
It would increase the number of dead Russians. 100%.
The guns fired 5 times today, but we've been told they would fire more if they had more ammunition. Also, they'd like a newer gun. They call this one Grandma because it's so old.
The ultimate definition of battling against the odds. Outgunned and outnumbered, but not outdone. Deborah Haynes, Sky News, near the Russian border in northeastern Ukraine.
Next, a boxing match 25 years in the making. Not since 1999 have 2 heavyweight champions faced off with all the world titles on the line. Well, that's about to change in a few hours, though, with Tyson Fury and Alexander Usyk meeting in Saudi Arabia for the right to be called the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. Well, Sky News' sports presenter Jackie Beltrao is in Riyadh tonight. Jackie, what can we expect to see in the run-up to the match?
Laura, it's so difficult to hear you because they are between bouts. It's the second last fight before the main event. It's very, very noisy here, as you can imagine. The Kingdom Arena absolutely packed. 26,000 people, every ticket sold for this main event, which is the undisputed heavyweight championship of the world. A huge moment for this sport because it hasn't happened for 25 years. And what we can expect is the ring walk, the showbiz part of this sport. We asked Tyson Fury what music he was going to come out to, and he said, that's a secret, you'll have to wait and see. And we know Usyk likes a bit of up-tempo dance music, so probably that will be him walking on with the Ukrainian flag and his 3 belts. And it's such anticipation around here, and you get different answers when you ask the pundits who they think is going to win it. And most people think it's a 50-50 fight. There's a big gap in terms of weight and height between the two. Tyson Fury so much bigger, so much taller than the Ukrainian, but the Ukrainian is such a talented, gifted boxer that even, AJ couldn't get the better of him twice, and he's a big man as well. So you would imagine it's going to be a very exciting fight, might well go the distance. Tyson Fury saying that he wants to win, but he doesn't really care about the history of the whole thing. He's not bothered about going down with the greats like Muhammad Ali and Mike Tyson. That means nothing to him. He's here for the win and for the money. But what a redemption story it would be if he could be the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. He's had so many troubles. He's struggled with depression and alcohol, and it's been a real rocky road for him, and it would be the pinnacle of this sport if he could walk away with all 4 belts. As for Usyk, if he walks away the undisputed champion, what an amazing thing for his country. He's such a proud man, loves flying the Ukrainian flag whenever he can. He was on the front line at the start of the war until President Zelensky said, you know, serve your country better in the ring. So he went back to his boxing, and he has been undisputed world champion before at cruiserweight. He stepped up to the weight with all the money and all the kudos, and he could walk away tonight king of this division and back to Ukraine with some amazing good news.
Yeah, a lot at stake for both of them. Jackie Beltrao, thanks for joining us, and thank you for your own personal fight with the sound there. Thank you. Now, thousands of homes in Devon have had their boiling restrictions lifted following a parasite outbreak in the drinking water. About 16,000 households in the Brixham area of Devon were told to boil their drinking water following 46 confirmed cases of the disease Cryptosporidium. This afternoon, 14,500 of those were told that actually the water was now safe to consume after water quality monitoring results found no traces of the parasite in the Alston supply area. Restrictions, though, remain in place for 2,500 homes in Hillhead, upper parts of Brixham and Kingswear. South West Water says it will only lift the remaining boil water notices when it is entirely satisfied it's safe to do so. Well, staying with water pollution, and there have been protests today on beaches and at rivers across the country against the state of our waterways. The demonstrations were organized by Surfers Against Sewage and saw people paddling out into the waters to demand more action from the government. Spills of raw sewage into England's rivers and seas reached their worst level on record last year, with the number of individual spills soaring to over 464,000. Now, this is up 54% from around 301,000 incidents in 2022. Although the Environment Agency has noted that the increase in spills is partly because of wetter weather and also because monitoring has stepped up. Today, 30 protests have been staged across the UK by Surfers Against Sewage along rivers and coastlines as part of their biggest day of national action yet. Sky's Shingi Mararike has been in Scarborough at one of the paddle-out protests today.
Days at the beach should be a simple pleasure, but here in Scarborough and across the country, one group's mission was to spell out how that pleasure is being polluted. Surfers Against Sewage want to turn the tide on the record number of discharges flowing into Britain's waterways, which they say are being ruined for those who love to surf, swim and paddle in them.
I know the effects. I know the effects on me, I know the effects on my friends, the effects on my business, and the effects on a lot of people in the UK. And we pay a lot of money to water companies. We vote people in for governments. We expect them to follow our wills to do what we should. You know, water companies make billions of pounds. £2.7 billion in dividends paid the last sort of like 2 financial years. That's not small potatoes, is it?
People here also feel strongly about the problem.
This is a big issue for us, not just because it's an environmental concern, it's also Scarborough's greatest asset. So for us as business owners, we really need this seafront and the seafront around the whole country to be clean.
On this slice of the northeast coast, the water quality is rated poor. That issue is an insight into national ones, combining political, social and environmental concerns, because millions of us use our blue spaces and pay our bills. Those concerns being echoed on England's opposite coast in Brighton, where a famous face joined the protesters.
I'm passionate about paddleboarding. I go out, I do it for my fitness and my well-being. I love the tranquility of being on the sea or the rivers. And last weekend I went to my local river and it absolutely was disgusting. It smelled, it was a gross colour, and I thought, this isn't right.
There were protests elsewhere too, the group demanding an end to untreated water discharges by 2030, behind better drainage and monitoring systems. Both the Environment Agency and DEFRA accept sewage pollution is unacceptable, with both putting millions of pounds towards improving the situation. DEFRA says storm overflows are being monitored, with criminal prosecution a potential punishment for breaches.
In a year where the politics of so many things matter more, those are promises that can't just be washed away. Shingi Marike, Sky News, Scarborough.
Now, if you missed the stunning Northern Lights display last week, I've got some good news for you. Scientists say that we could soon see a repeat of the stunning Aurora Borealis display. The Earth is likely to be hit by more solar flares in a fortnight as the cluster that triggered the display approaches again. It comes as the sun approaches so-called solar maximum, with the amount of radiation that it produces hitting an 11-year high. Now, Chelsea have won the Women's Super League. That's after they thrashed Manchester United 6-0 at Old Trafford to secure the league title in manager Emma Hayes' final game in charge. Our national correspondent Tom Parmenter was there.
To give Emma Hayes the right send-off, her Chelsea team had to win and bang in the goals against Manchester United. It would mean that whatever second-place Man City did at Aston Villa wouldn't be enough. It took just 2 minutes for Chelsea to get started.
We're right and looking for the cross. Ramirez! What a start for Chelsea!
And they kept coming.
And here is Ritin Connery, who's got space for Chelsea. It's Ritin Connery! It's 2 for Chelsea!
Manchester City did get past Aston Villa, but the news of more Chelsea goals kept coming through.
Lawrence leaves it. Here's Fran Kirby!
The sixth and final goal came from Fran Kirby, signing off on her own Chelsea career. That made it a 5th consecutive WSL title for this side.
Chelsea are champions again!
At the end of Emma Hayes' 12 extraordinary years at the club. And it's that no-nonsense approach that has been her hallmark.
I think women's football will explode. It's already exploding, but it's going to really explode in the next few years. And that was all that I wanted.
Like every great head coach, Emma Hayes has assembled a team of leaders on the pitch. They weren't daunted by this moment, they embraced it.
I think she's done so much from it, going from like nothing and built it from the ground up. I don't think that can be replaced.
She made such a good team, and like no other manager can do what she can do. I don't know, she could do unimaginable. Anything.
She's done an amazing job, and kind of hats off to her, even though she's not with my club, but she's done a lot for the sport in general.
Emma Hayes leaves this job with women's football transformed in this country, and she's been a vital part of that. She heads to America and the US national side, who will be getting one of the finest coaches English football has ever produced. Tom Parmenter, Sky News, Old Trafford.
Let's get more sports news now from Sky Sports News and Leah.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
I just felt lost. I was thinking, where's life going now? Where's it going to take you to? Play for as long as you enjoy it. If you don't enjoy it, walk away from it. There's no point in doing something that you hate.
Can you remember the first time you ever thought about retirement or just what you would do after your football career?
I left Liverpool in time for Blackburn. And I remember being on a bus with Jason Roberts, who was our striker. And Jason must have been around about 30 at the time. And he was talking about retiring at that point, and I was thinking, why are you talking about this? And I remember him saying, people need to be more aware of retiring in football and understanding that when you retire, the paychecks no longer come in. The day-to-day life of turning up to football, being in an environment where you're training, keeping fit, you're in a team environment, you're around people. He went, one day that's all going to go. And I just sort of laughed it off, but he was already thinking that way. He was already planning. And I remember thinking nothing of it at the time. And then when I hit around about 32, 33, I thought to myself, I need to think about what I'm going to do here. I felt like I was getting frustrated with football because I'd played in the Premier League and then you slowly start to drop down and it becomes difficult. And that might sound a bit elitist or snobby in some way. I just lost the buzz for it. I felt like I was not playing the way I wanted to. I wasn't probably dieting the way I should and probably being as focused as I was because I couldn't get to the top again. And I felt down, and it depressed me. And it's not until now I look back and go, God, I was like massively depressed for years off the back of it. I retired at, 35? I probably retired 31.
Like mentally?
Yeah.
And so what were those years like day to day? Because you said you were depressed. What was the day to day of that like when you're trying to still play? Just
Difficult, almost like a sense of feeling sorry for yourself. And like getting up out of bed every morning's a slog because you're thinking, do I really want to do this anymore? Is it what I really want? There was just so much going on off the pitch as well. I'd had a whack off my financial advisor, ill-advised, and that was always in the back of my mind. I remember getting a phone call saying like something had happened financially and I'd lost a load of money. I didn't sleep properly for 6 years off the back of that. So I'm going now into training every day, probably on 3 hours sleep. Head touches the pillow and constantly thinking, how do I get out of this?
Do you think if that hadn't have happened, you would have retired earlier because you wouldn't have been chasing the money?
Quite possibly, yeah. Yeah.
And what does that do to you to play while kind of chasing money?
It's strange when I look back at it now because I think it's not everything. Money's not everything. I wish I'd have just gone, do you know what? I've had a great run. I've lost the love for it. I'm going to find something else that makes me happy.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's papers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by Shola Mamimu, author and activist, and Benedict Spence, political commentator. Welcome both. Among the stories that we will be discussing, the front of the Daily Mail, or the Mail on Sunday, their headline, Cuts leave UK with just one plane for Paris D-Day jump. We'll be right back.
I'm Martin Brunt, and I'm Sky's crime correspondent. My most memorable story was, and still is, the disappearance of Madeleine McCann.
Please, please do not hurt her. Please give our little girl back.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. For detectives, the first 48 hours after a murder are crucial in the search for clues. The public expects them to find Jill Dando's killer soon. The British detectives are planning to meet forensic experts, academics, and even witch doctors. I remember the grimmest case, the Soham murders of schoolgirls Holly and Jessica. I felt I can't undo what's happened, but I can help explain it. Ian Huntley was arrested and charged within a fortnight of the murders.
I've never murdered anyone, I've never raped anyone. What am I in jail for?
The parole board has to decide if Bronson needs to be kept locked up for the safety of the public. My biggest challenge was to persuade a jailed diamond thief to answer my letters. Martin Brunt, Sky News at the Old Bailey.
Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with Sholamos Shogbamimu, author and activist, and Benedict Spence, political commentator. So let's see what is on some of those front pages. Well, The Observer leads with a plea from the Archbishop of Canterbury to both the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and Labour's Keir Starmer to get rid of the two-child cap on benefit payments. The Telegraph reports on NHS staff being told that they'd have to work evenings and weekends under Labour plans to shorten waiting lists. The Sunday Express carries an exclusive interview with the Business Secretary, Kemi Badenoch, who has taken aim at company bosses for what she describes as too great a focus on activism and political causes. The Sunday Times reports on Chancellor Jeremy Hunt saying he'll honour his promise in seeking justice for victims of the contaminated blood scandal. The Mail claims plans for a parachute drop over Normandy for the 80th anniversary of D-Day have been scaled back because cutbacks have left the Ministry of Defence without enough planes. TV star Tina Malone has told The Mirror her army veteran husband took his own life and she's setting up a charity to help those returning from war zones. And The People reports that calls for help by stalking victims skyrocketed by 27% across the UK in recent weeks since the hit Netflix drama Baby Reindeer aired. And The Star has a warning for England's Euro hopefuls that they could be kept awake by rowdy German frogs during this summer's competition. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us talk about them. And as I mentioned, we are joined tonight by Sholamos Shogbamimu and Benedict Spence, author and activist and political commentator both. Thank you both for joining us. OK, let's take a look at one story that is kind of dominating the Sunday papers, and that is, of course, the tainted blood scandal, because the report is finally published on Monday. Let's take a look at the front page of the Sunday Times. Tainted blood is the worst scandal of my lifetime. It's time for justice, vows Hunt. I mean, we've seen a lot of reports on it. It's heartbreaking. Shola, what do you make of it?
I think it's an utter disgrace it's taken this long. I think that government after government have let down this family. As we understand it, the inquiry is coming to an end tomorrow, and the government is finally looking to put together a compensation of at least £10 billion. But the fact that it coincides with an election cycle kind of makes me cynical, because I'm thinking all this could have been dealt with, handled, like at least decades ago. Here, Hunt is talking about keeping the vow he made to a dying victim in his constituency a decade ago. And, the Conservatives have been in power for, 13 years? I'm just saying that there's a whole lot more that we need to do to support the loved ones, but also to make sure it never happens again. And I wonder whether or not those who made the decisions that affected a lot of these victims, whether anybody saw time in jail. I think it's really important that it's not enough for us to just say this was bad, I'm sorry. I understand that Rishi Sunak is meant to be given an apology. But people should be paying the price. Not just institutions. People should be paying the price for making these kind of decisions that have led to loss of lives.
Well, in a lot of the interviews, with relatives of those affected, they say they want justice, vindication, recognition of the pain they've gone through. Benedict, we'll take a little look at the compensation issue slightly separately. But, I mean, what do you make of I guess, the scandal that we're finally going to get a report on Monday about?
Well, Sir Brian Langstaff's report will come out tomorrow, and it is, as Shola says, it's something that's been going on for a very long time, far too long. Repeated governments we've had since this started actually happening. I think we've had Labour, we've had Conservative, we've had Labour again, we've had Coalition, and now we've had Conservative for a very long time. So it is an endless cycle of politicians not quite getting to grips with this. it can, I suppose, come under the umbrella of many failures of various aspects of British institutions, the NHS being one. Again, there's a story later that we'll come on to with that. But earlier on this year, we were discussing issues around Royal Mail, the post workers scandal. When David Cameron first became Prime Minister, they reopened an inquiry into the Hillsborough scandal because, of course, there was a cover-up there. It's just sort of this ongoing culture across British society, and actually it's in the private sector as well as in the public sector, and it seems, given the many sort of iterations of government we've had, it seems almost to be apolitical, that actually what people seem to care most about is not correcting the scandals, it's not making things better, it's covering their own backs and pushing things down the line as long as they possibly can. And as you say, we're going to get to the compensation issue slightly separately, but it's a huge sum, and perhaps it wouldn't have been quite so huge if this had been addressed a lot earlier. And so now successive governments, as they say, they pay the price for the failures of their forebears. But again, who actually is going to be made to pay for this? The taxpayer.
So speaking of compensation, that's actually the line in The Observer. So if we can just pull up that front page. Hunt told to honour the pledge on infected blood payments. Now, what it says here that actually when Jeremy Hunt was chair of the All-Party Health Select Committee just in 2022, so not a million years ago, he said that the payment of £10 billion should be made immediately because, of course, people are dying, every day matters. But now that he's Chancellor, the dynamic may have changed. Shola.
Why should it have changed? We're either putting lives, humanity over money, or we're not. And this, again, this government just continually demonstrates that they do not have the right priorities at heart. And I think this is why people say politics is a whole different kind of demon. That the moment you get into a political office, apparently all of the, the goodness and humanity and focus you had before you go into political office goes out of the window. The reality here is that Hunt should have carried this out as much as possible, not just him, but the entire government he partly represented, and the Conservative government that's been in power for 13 years. It is not good enough. And I'm going to say this again. As far as I'm concerned, it is not enough to just hold institutions to account, to say, OK, let's put in reforms, let's change this. People that made these decisions should be made to pay the price, because that might go a long way to decision makers actually factoring in what would be what would be a cost here.
I guess we'll see what's in the report. But Benedict, your point specifically on compensation.
Well, it's going to start at 10 billion. That's actually what I'd say, is that is the baseline. It could actually be significantly higher. And I can understand why there is perhaps some hesitancy among the bean counters in the Treasury over this, in number 11, because they are trying to offer, tax cuts to people ahead of the next general election because they want to say to people, well, we'll spend this on X, Y, Z and the other. But, 10 billion is not a small drop in the ocean. It's a huge amount of money. And another one of the main themes that we've had over the last 14 years is stagnant growth in this country. If you don't have any growth and you're not actually growing the tax base that you can pull from, well, it becomes very difficult to find 10 billion for a compensation scheme because it means something else, be it, nurses, be it the armed forces, be it doctor strikes. That means those people don't get paid. So and as I say, it's a tricky thing. It means that governments down the line end up paying a lot more for the sins of previous ones, and it's the taxpayer that ultimately foots the bill.
Let's leave it there because, of course, it's a story that is going to roll on and we'll talk about later as well. Let's go to The Observer, again, front page there. Archbishop of Canterbury urges Starmer to ditch cruel two-child benefit cap, which the Archbishop Welby basically called... what's the word? Even the United Nations effectively said it went again. It fell short, there it is, of our values as a society.
I mean, it's slightly ironic to hear the United Nations calling it that, given that the majority of countries that make up the United Nations do not have this kind of policy in place. But I do agree with the Archbishop that we shouldn't have a cap on the number of on the number of children, at which point, your third child you don't help with. What the Archbishop focuses on is the suggestion that this pushes children into immediate poverty in this country. That I don't actually think is the key thing here, because, again, as I just sort of suggested, one of the major factors that is hindering this country is economic growth. We are facing a demographic crisis in the country where we are not having enough children in general. If you really want to know what poverty will look like, well, you just wait and see what happens in 20 or 30 years' time when there is a population collapse. We need to be incentivising as many people as we can to have children, if anything, just to keep the population numbers up.
Sure.
I do think it's an inhumane welfare policy. I see Keir Starmer once again. I mean, this is a man who just in 2020 pledged that he was going to scrap this, right? And once again, for his own political ambition, is decide to U-turn. You can't trust him on anything. And this is not the kind of thing you should U-turn on, because this is very, very important to majority of people. And the reality here is that in 2021, 2022, I believe the figure of the number of children in poverty was well over 4 million. We now know it's even more than that. And for me, that is the key thing here. We can't have more and more of our children being driven into poverty, and then families who can barely make ends meet falling into under that poverty line with no care and no focus. And I think Keir Starmer thinks, and this is a word he used, that he wants to come across as being responsible on public financing. This is not responsible at all. You don't stop helping, supporting, feeding, clothing, sheltering children simply because they've reached a certain number. That is not a responsible leader. That's not what a moral leader does. That's what a morally bankrupt leader does.
Very, very briefly, literally 5 seconds each. Do you think that Labour will heed the advice of the Archbishop of Canterbury?
I don't know. I can't trust Keir Starmer as far as I can throw him.
I don't think there's the money for it, sadly.
OK. All right. We're going to have to leave it there. We will, of course, touch on this subject again coming up. Among the stories that we'll be discussing, this on the front of the Telegraph, the headline, Russia and China manipulating UK voters with social media. We'll be right back.
Well, at risk of sounding mealy-mouthed, good and bad, I mean, I think the face has got a real sense of character to it. He looks sort of benign, slightly apprehensive. It looks like him. It looks like a living image, which is important. It's a very important part of a photographer to catch this sense of someone living through the sitting, living through time. But at the same time, he's vanishing away into all that red. It's a sort of fiery furnace all around him. I'm not quite sure why. I believe it's supposed to echo the uniform of the Welsh Guards, which he's wearing, which is red. But it subsumes him. And if you think about the great portraits of the past, you think of Van Dyck and Charles on his horse, his predecessor, Charles, on his great horse thrusting, or Holbein's very famous Henry VIII, this huge figure presenting himself to the world. And instead we have this king who's almost vanishing, he's dissolving. But it feels very randomly modern to me. I see no reason to have this great cloud of red around him. I think I prefer a painting, which is, this is a portrait. It's his first portrait as monarch. It would be a good portrait if he was set in a symbolic stage set, I think. And instead we have this, well, as I say, a vanishing figure. I would still argue, but why? Why have this great sea of red?
I'd argue why not. I really like it.
Do you? It depends. I mean, it's a matter of taste, but it's hard to judge, but it is an enormous painting. That's another thing. And apparently he had to stand on a box to paint it, and the king stood on a box that they
Yes, could 8'6" by 6'6" apparently. So that's a whole lot of king and a whole lot of red.
It is a huge sea of red, and it also depends a lot where it's going to hang. I mean, it doesn't look too bad behind the gold setting where it's hung now. It just seems to me a random choice to have this sea of red. But I mean, maybe a random choice you like, a random choice I don't happen to like.
We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our planet. Mark Stone, Sky News in Washington, D.C.
Welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me now, Sholamos Shogbamimu and Benedict Spence. OK, let's take a look now at the front page of the Sunday Telegraph. Quite an upsetting, well, potentially, upsetting and worrying story. Russia and China manipulating UK voters with social media war. The accusation here that Russia and China are manipulating public opinion by promoting pro-Palestinian influencers online in an effort to stoke division. What do you make of this story specifically, Benedict, the way it's written?
I mean, I'm not surprised. I'd say, one of the things about the internet was it was supposed to usher in a great sort of information era about clarity and, you wouldn't be able to hide anything. And if anything, propaganda just gets a lot more complex and a lot more mature. It's no surprise that Russia and China would be trying to do this sort of thing through the prism of this particularly polarizing conflict. In much the same way that, frankly, we've seen a lot sort of in the information war sort of broadcast out there throughout the invasion of Ukraine. Anybody who spent any sort of time online will know that actually there was an awful lot of propaganda about that. And I'm almost certain you will see a great deal of the sort of thing happening, a great big ratcheting up as we get closer to a potential Chinese invasion of Taiwan. We need to remember that actually the internet is still something of a Wild West situation, which is why governments want to clamp down on it very hard. And it's why I find so very interesting that TikTok in this country and in the United States, although they want to put limits on it there, is largely very open and free. But in China, it is banned, and there is complete control by the government over what it is that their own populations can see, because they understand, actually, this medium is incredibly powerful.
And Shola, what's interesting here is that it's not necessarily pushing a particular side, it's more about stoking division, that seems to be the aim.
I think the story, the way that it's been written, is pushing a particular side. So Russia and China may be trying to manipulate UK voters, but it's the fact that the angle of the story is pushing it, it's kind of supporting the propaganda that supports, to my mind, it supports the Israel propaganda by saying that Russia and China, the enemies, are supporting pro-Palestinian accounts. That is where, for me, the kind of disinformation comes in and misinformation. The way this article is written will kind of grow distrust in information from accounts that are actually doing good work in raising awareness. That, for me, is a problem here. I'm not saying Russia and China are not trying to manipulate through social media. That's not that's not it. I think here this article is saying, all those things you're hearing about,
one side, basically.
Absolutely trying to discredit the pro-Palestinian movement.
OK, let's move on to the Sunday Express. The headline there, big front page, companies told end this woke madness. Cabinet Minister, and that's Kemi Badenoch, tears into bosses over diversity drive. She's saying they have to get back to delivering great goods and services. Shola, I'm going to come to you.
Oh, no. I need Benedict to say this.
OK, all right, then, Benedict.
Well, no, I suppose... look, Kemi Badenoch would like to be the leader of the Conservative Party. We all know that. She thinks that talking about woke, everything's woke, goes down very well with her audience. And she probably actually just has a sort of a flip book or maybe a darts board with topics on it where she throws the dart and goes, what is going to be woke today? Today it's going to be, I don't know, it's going to be social media, it's going to be private companies, it's going to be sport, it's going to be something. That's woke and we've got to have less of it. Yep. And that goes down very well. I mean, look... The Conservatives are also supposed to be, I thought, about the free market. They were supposed to be about ideas and actually people being able to decide what they want. I'm not really sure it is the position of a politician to come along and say, you need to stop doing this. I think if this is companies pushing certain ethical lines, consumers will decide if they like that or not. And companies will find out that way whether or not these things are popular. So...
Shola? He summed it up really well. But I would say that Kemi Badenoch truly understands her base. And I would say her base are the politically illiterate base. They feed off what I call, bigoted slogans and without applying any thought process to, keywords and phrases and rhetoric. And he's right. She probably, because she's power hungry, is looking at, what work can I throw in now just to show all these people, this demographic that I want to win over or I want to maintain. I wanted to know that I am anti-woke. Feeding the ignorance of what woke is meant to be. She is not...
Which is hard to define anyway.
No, it's not hard to define. OK, black people already told you what woke is. And woke simply means being woke, i.e. you're awake to racial injustice. It's not difficult. It's not complex. I just said it in English, not in Latin or Swahili, so I can't understand why people find it difficult to comprehend. But what Kemi Badenoch does as the black face of the Conservative Party's racist, bigoted policies is to try and hone in on the very division and lack of unity she claims that diversity is meant to be, because that's nonsense. The whole point of having diversity, inclusion, and equity is because for centuries there was no equality, there was no equity, and nothing was diverse. Everything was centered on, white male. It was centered on whiteness, or, it did not make room for people from other, different genders, like women. Did not make room for black or brown people. Did not make room for other people, including LGBTQIA.
Charlotte, we're just going to have to end it there. Let me bring up the mirror very quickly. We're going to talk about the story, the big fight, fury between Usyk, but I'll tell you what, I'm pretty sure we're going to cover this story very, very soon. So that is it for now. Stay with us with more news at the top of the 11.